Welcome to my best of 2021, some of my favourite historical weapons that I've acquired over the last year. Hey folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. Now obviously as an antique arms dealer, international arms dealer, and also running this channel, I'm running historical fencing clubs, a lot of historical weapons, mostly swords but also other things, which we'll see in this video as well, come through my hands. Through many different means, partly because I'm buying and selling things, partly because I'm collecting things, partly because I'm reviewing things, I get some things to review of course, and partly also because I'm testing and developing new products, new replicas for example, and in fact some of the things we're going to see in this video will cover all of those categories. And I've decided on these favourites pretty arbitrarily, it has to be said. They're just the things that have some particular thing about them that has really stuck with me and makes me really fond of them. But incredibly briefly before I go on, I'm going to have a quick word from our sponsors for this video, who are Raid Shadow Legends. Raid is the fantasy combat game that's completely free to download and play. In fact, you can download it with a special introduction pack with the link below my video here or with the QR code on screen. Raid has just added the biggest and baddest cloud boss ever, called Hydra, and he's got 6 heads. Trying to take down this baddie is super tough. Hydra's got unique mechanics and trying to work out how to beat him is super difficult. And if Hydra's not enough for you, then this month Raid's also giving away a super limited edition champion to every player in the game. Some of you are going to recognise him already. It's esports legend and Navi superstar Simple. Between now and January 28th, Simple's limited edition champ is available for free to download both to new and old players. Literally all you have to do is just log into the game for 7 days anytime between now and 28th of January. So now's an awesome time to get playing. You can either use the link in my description box below or scan the QR code on the screen. And you'll get some free resources and a free mystery champion straight away. These rewards are going to be waiting for you up here in the inbox, and remember this is only for new players and only for the next 30 days. You can find me in game under the name Captain Context, and if you're quick enough you can join my clan. So I will see you in game. Thanks for sticking with me. Now let's get back to my favourite weapons, historical weapons of 2021. Now first of all I'm going to look at antiques and then I'm going to look at modern replicas essentially. All of these are historical weapons in a sense. Some of them are actually historical in that they're literally from history, like this one, which we'll see in this list, but then we're also going to look at historical replicas as well. I'm going to run pretty quickly through them, and for each one I'm going to say in a nutshell what it is about it that I particularly like. So first up, I may as well start with the one in my hand, and it is this. So it's an Indo-Persian, we could call it Mamluk style sword. Some people might call it a kilich or a pala, some people might call it a shamshir. There are lots of debates over what exactly we should term this. This is probably an Indian example, as evidenced by the nature of the ricasso here, which is sometimes known as the Indian ricasso. And the reason that I particularly love this sword over other relatively similar swords that I have owned or own currently is that this is beefy as heck, and this is a real chopper of a sword. It feels like a medieval arming sword or a falchion. It has got real beef and authority to it, and it's chunky. Even the proportions of the grip, which incidentally have got silver decoration on them, are really chunky. And I think that of all swords that have been made by mankind, this particular type of sword, which the British in the 19th century would have called a Mameluke style sword, is one of the most attractive designs that has ever been devised. And obviously it connects to certain European sword designs, for example Polish sabres and Hungarian sabres. Equally it connects to Ottoman Turkish swords, and all the way over, obviously, to the Mamluks, and all the way over to India. So a very popular sword design that was adopted by high-ranking European officers, particularly generals, as well. Now next up are two swords which will get their own videos at some point in due course. I've been meaning to do it for a while actually, and they are related swords, so I'll show them together. They are both what we call scroll hilts. Now they're not identical in that the one in this hand, you'll notice, this is an asymmetrical scroll hilt. This is a normal one, and this is a symmetrical, or as Wilkinson called it, an equibalanced scroll hilt. So they are both scroll hilts, but they're not exactly the same guards, and they both have different grips. This has the standard back piece or back strap with a checkered thumb piece and a checkered pommel in this case. This is strapless, so to speak, and this has what was known as a French back or a French pommel. That is, it has a pommel cap which is entirely checkered. And both of these swords were categorically carried during the Indian Mutiny of 1857 to 58, both carried by documented, well-known officers in that war, and that's one of the reasons that I will do videos for each of them. And just very briefly to show the blades, this one is a regulation, although largely proportioned, 1845 pattern style fullered blade, as found on lots of British officers' swords of this era, in very nice condition, with initials etched on one side of the blade and Persian script showing Wilkinson's name on the other side of the blade, as found on the Sind cavalry swords, as featured in the National Army Museum in the Royal Armouries. So a very historically significant sword, and also just a fantastic sword, even if it was just the sword without that identification. An absolutely fantastic sword. This one is also identified to a well-known officer who in this case actually was at the Siege of Lucknow and had his leg blown off, unfortunately, but he went on to continue serving as an officer with one leg, and went on to be quite high-ranking officer. But this actually has a slightly different blade, in that at first sight you might think, well, that's a standard 1845 pattern, but it's actually dead straight by design, which at this date most blades weren't. They were slightly curved. So it's dead straight, and it's completely plain as well. He ordered a plain fighting blade, which was something that officers who wanted a fighting sword at this time often did. So I like this because this is a special order fighting sword with a very specific hilt design and a somewhat specific blade design, and it's to a famous, well, not famous, but a person, a significant person of the time, who was definitely at the Siege of Lucknow, and that has been they've both been service sharpened. They both definitely saw action in that they were carried in the field of conflict. Now, the next antique sword that I've got is not the first one I've owned of these, but it's the nicest condition one that I've ever had, and it is one of these. What is one of these? Well, it's a 1796 light cavalry sabre, but it's not, because you'll notice that the blade is not a 1796 light cavalry blade, although the hilt is essentially of that pattern. This is the so-called, and famous at least within British antique sword collecting fraternity, the Osborne and Gunby, what should we call it, clipped point blade, compromise cut and thrust blade. So this was in answer to, at the period, that sabres were considered not very good for thrusting with, which frankly they're not. So it was a compromise design to try and make the regulation sabre into a better cut and thrust sword. And again, I will make a dedicated video about this, so I don't want to say too much about it here, but I think it is an absolutely awesome design, very similar in some ways to a Langmesser or certain types of falchion from the medieval period, even a little bit similar to certain Middle Eastern swords as well. And it's just an absolutely awesome sword made by one of the best makers of the day. Fantastic design. Why do I love it? Because it's a great design. This is a great condition example of that great design. Now, next up in my favourite of 2021 is an exceptionally rare sword that at some point I'm probably going to sell, but I haven't been able to bring myself to do it so far. It is the only one that I have ever owned, and it is almost certainly the only one I will ever own. It's the experimental 1904 pattern British cavalry sword. Now, to some of you that won't mean anything at all, but essentially they had a whole bunch of experiments to try and come up with a new cavalry sword design. And most of those experiments led nowhere, although piece by piece they resulted in the 1908 pattern, which became the final cavalry sword, service cavalry sword of the British Army, was used throughout World War I and beyond, in fact, even in the Afghanistan campaign of 1919 and so on. The Indian Army adopted it in 1918 as well, and it's still carried today. Okay, so this was the last well, one of the last prototypes or experiments that came before the final one. And it's significantly different, even if at first sight it looks a bit like the 1908. In many ways, it's more like Spanish swords of this period. And it is actually significantly different to the British 1908. And again, this will get dedicated videos in the future. It's on my to-do list. I won't talk too much about it because I'll save that for the future videos. Why do I like it so much? Because it's so goddamn rare, okay? It is really, really rare to get hold of one of these, and I was very lucky to do so. And one of the reasons I've been hanging on to it, I will sell it at some point, but one of the reasons I've been hanging on to it is because I want to make some decent videos out of it and articles and stuff as well. So another related sword that I acquired very recently, in fact, only a few weeks ago, from a collection of someone who unfortunately passed away, who I actually knew. I've been shooting with him, and his collection went up for sale, and I managed to grab a few of the things from the collection in auction, and this was one of those, and this will stay in my collection because it is so freaking weird. And again, I've done a video about this sword on my Patreon channel to my patrons, just a short one, kind of introduction to it. I will do a public video about this sword at some point, and I'm just going to show you how blooming weird this thing is very quickly. I won't go into too much detail because again, there's a dedicated video coming up about it. You'll notice it's almost got a quill back point there. It's got a double-fullered, very broad and large backsword blade. It has a bowl hilt, a bit like a 1908. It has a ergonomic grip that is designed to be gripped like this, and a finger loop made of steel. Super weird, but we'll see that more in a future video. Now we're getting near to the end of the antique swords for 2021 that I've acquired and kept, and one of those is a Japanese sword. So you know I have a small Japanese sword collection, and you've seen this sword in a number of videos over this year, and it's an original 17th century blade. It's Siraj, it's been shortened. So originally it was a longer katana blade, and it dates to the late 1600s. So it's got a good age to it. It's not in the best polish, but it's in pretty good polish, enough that you can see the structure of the steel and the hamon, which is Sugai's straight hamon, nice and clearly. It's got some Edo period fittings on it that perhaps could be improved, but they're nice enough for the quality of the blade, I think. And it's just really nice. It's got a really nice feeling in the hand, and it's just really nice having a sword that's a few hundred years old, traditionally Japanese made, and there's something about it. It's got a certain charm to it, this sword, and I'm really fond of it, actually. And it's also been very good for me in learning more about Nihonto, or Japanese, traditionally made Japanese swords, which of course assists me in assessing modern replicas as well, because I have original antiques to compare to. So just to my point of view, just reviewing modern Japanese swords if you don't have access to the original antiques doesn't mean an awful lot. You really need to be able to see what the originals are like to know how to judge the replicas. So it's important to me personally, but I also think it's a charming little sword. Okay, so the final antique for my best of 2021 is this. And I don't think I've really featured this in video much. It may have been in a couple of videos tangentially, but essentially it's a large military small sword. This is an example of an officer's small sword. Why do I like it so much? It's German, incidentally. Well, first of all, it's got a very tidy and attractive hilt, I think, anyway. Yes, it's quite ornate, but in fundamental structure, it's quite large, it's quite robust, and it's relatively simple. And it's got fairly large finger rings as well for most of the small swords I'm compared to. So whilst you could stick your finger through there, usually in most small sword treatises tell you to put your finger on the side. But the main reason I like it is the size of the blade. Most small swords are quite dainty and don't really have any cutting capacity. This one actually does. So when Matt Easton says small swords don't cut, I'm talking about typical triangular section small swords. This is an example of a small sword. Is it a spadroon? Not quite. I wouldn't quite say it's a spadroon, but some people might disagree with me. You could call it a spadroon if you like. Personally, I would say it's a small sword with a little bit of cutting capacity, and it's essentially like a downsized rapier blade. So it's a flattened hexagonal section, and it's got fairly decent edges on it. So indeed, you know, primarily you'd be using this with point work. You'd be using it as a thrusting sword, but it does mean that if your point gets pushed offline, you can return with a cut. And to the head or the hands, perhaps even to the thighs, it will have some effect when that is sharpened up. So I think it's a nice, big, robust example of a probably middle of the 18th century, probably, yeah, middle of the 1700s, military officer's small sword, spadroon-ish. So we're on to the replicas now. Now I'll hammer through these fairly quickly. A couple of them I can't really show you, but I will talk about them briefly because they're things I'm developing, and these aren't final prototypes, but they're close to final. Okay, so you'll get a sneak peek of those quickly. Now, the replicas I'm going to go through arbitrarily on size. I'm going to start with the smallest one I've got here, which is from Kailash Blades, this awesome kukri. This is a Hanshi style kukri, so it's an earlier, slender, longer type of kukri, and this actually hasn't had its full review yet. they've been revising the design of this particular one, and we've, you know, with consultation and back and forth, and so they've changed some of the stats on this blade. So I've held off reviewing this, but nevertheless, this is an absolutely gorgeous kukri. One of the nicest modern kukris that I have ever held. And as a go-to, if I had to grab a kukri to go on an expedition or do some kind of, I don't know, some kind of zombie apocalypse situation, this probably would be my go-to kukri for a fighting weapon, not necessarily for a tool. And with kukris, yes, they can be tools, yes, they can be weapons. Some are more weapons, some are more tools. This one is more of a weapon, in my view, than a tool, but it is absolutely sweet in the hand. It is so quick and responsive and just beautifully made, beautifully executed. So Kailash blades, check them out because they are making lovely, lovely things. So next up is something which we saw pretty recently, actually, I think only a month or so back, from Ravensbeak Forge. It is a really cute little pipe tomahawk, except it's not a pipe, that's a solid hammer, but nevertheless. And Ethan Blinkhorn there is making really, really nice tomahawks. And it's weird because I've got so many historical weapons, but I've never really owned a traditional tomahawk before, and this is as close to a traditional tomahawk as I've ever owned. But I've always wanted one. I don't know why I didn't sort of try to acquire one earlier, but it's just a lovely little thing. It's very handy. I really love the shaft on this, and it's cute. I think that's why I love it so much, and it's got a look of real traditional craftsmanship to it. So that's on my list for 2021 as well. So next up on my list of favourite things I've acquired in 2021 is one of the several swords. I could have actually shown a few of them because they're all very nice, but this one from LK Chen in particular, which is a late Ming dynasty. It's actually a replica of an original one, of a 17th century sword, and I haven't done the full review of this at all yet, but this is one of, I think it's my favourite sword that I have ever had from LK Chen, and you know that I've had a lot of their product line through my hands, and it is just an absolutely sweet late Ming dynasty dao. Okay, and I love everything about it, really. I like the styling, it's so-called kind of square style, I think it's called, of all the fittings. But I just love the proportions of this blade. It's very similar to a falchion or certain types of mesa, absolutely. I love the fact that it's got these double fullers down the blade, and then that really sweetly detailed false edge at the back there. In terms of handling, it's absolutely sweet. It's got power and authority to it. It feels very, very similar actually to mesas, to good quality mesa. So it's a very similar type of sword. You've got a nice bit of grip length on there as well, which helps with the balance. I love the wrapping of the grips, and I like the thick style of guard that this particular one has on it. So by and large, of all the LK Chen things that I've had this year, this is probably my favourite so far, and there will be a proper review for coming up really, really soon. So moving upwards in size, we actually get to a pair of swords which I can only show you very fleetingly. The reason is because they're not officially released yet. They are a development between myself, the Royal Armouries in Leeds, and Windlass. That's one of the things I've been working on. So we are doing an official product line with the Royal Armouries and Windlass, and these are basically going to be very, very close one-to-one replicas of certain swords from the Royal Armouries collection. And the first one I will fleetingly show very quickly is a type of mid to late 15th century English hanger in a scabbard. You'll have to wait to see the blades, I'm afraid, but this is an absolutely sweet sword, and Windlass have done an amazing job with it. Anyone who has any doubts or questions about distal taper, mass, balance, blah, 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 these are replicas of the originals. They have the same distal taper, the same mass, the same point of balance, the same cross-section of the blade, the same proportions of the guards, the grips, everything, okay? And the second one is this one, my personal favourite. It is a very particular type of arming sword, which I won't show you the blade of now. You can wait to see that in the future. But what is particularly special about that arming sword is the blade. It's not what you expect, okay? So that was a little sneak peek of those two. And then the next, this is not something that I've been involved with the development of at all. It's been something that's been sent to me to review, and it's actually one part of a daisha, of a pair of swords, a katana and wakizashi. But this one was actually sent to me by Ryan Sword, and they've actually They really pulled it out of the bag with this, and the quality has really surprised me. Now, I've actually had a few katanas sent to me in 2021 for review, but so far this one wins hands down. I'm really impressed with it. Everything to do with the tightness of the wrap, the finish and quality of the Fuchi Kashira, the Suba, also the buffalo horn fittings at the top and bottom of the saya, just everything about it really, and the blade, the proportions and curvature of the blade. The fact that they made this as a custom order for me, and it is a longer, so this is not normal katana length, this is essentially an O katana, essentially of longsword length, and it handles absolutely beautifully. It's got good distal taper, beautiful handling to it, great edge on it, beautiful hamon. So again, full review of that will be coming in due course, but Ryan Sword, who I think a lot of people see as a sort of budget manufacturer, give them the right specs and they can actually make something really good. So really impressed with that. Now on to a couple of big things. So the first big thing that I've been really happy with in 2021 is my poleaxe. I haven't done an awful lot with it yet. I've whacked some wood and I've bashed some things around, give it some basic strength testing. This was actually purchased from Armor Bohemia, who are a reseller. I think it was originally made by a company called Casto, but it's out of the Czech Republic. You can buy it directly from Casto for cheaper than through Armor Bohemia, but Armor Bohemia do have very good service, so if you want to get it quickly or that kind of stuff, then they're very good, and they did get it to me quickly, no problems, straight in a box from Czech Republic to my house in a few days. So yeah, I'm happy at last to have a poleaxe that I can use for the purpose of videos, but also for doing things in armour, demonstrations in armour, but also we're going to do some testing with this in due course as well. I won't say that this is the best quality poleaxe that you could get with your money. There are other companies who for more money will make you a better quality poleaxe than this, but for an entry-level price product, I think that this is very good. And I should also point out the Warhammer over there that I've had for absolute years. A lot of people over the years have asked me who made it, and I now know that it was made by the same company that made this in the Czech Republic. It's made by Casto. I actually bought that off a stall at a reenactment fair years ago, like 15 or more years ago, and so I didn't really know the company that I was buying it from. I just bought it, handed over the money, but I'm pretty sure it's the same guys that make these because of the casting finish and the shape and that kind of stuff. You can buy something off their website. So absolutely happy with this poleaxe so far. Let's see how it stands up in 2022. It will be getting a lot more use than it's had in 2021, but I think it was a good purchase, certainly for the purposes of my channel and my own personal use this year. And the final and biggest, it has to be said, certainly sort of heftiest and most impressive to look at, I think, if not literally in length the biggest thing that I've acquired, a historical weapon that I've acquired in 2021, you might notice because it's no longer on the wall behind me, is the amazing Zweihander from Kveten. Now, full disclosure, of course, you know that I have a working relationship with Kveten, I should be saying, because of course we developed the Easton Sabre Mark III together, which is their best-selling sword to date. So this is one of their Zweihanders, and there aren't an enormous number of companies on the market making usable, functional, combat quality, combat ready, but also correctly weighted with the correct distal taper and balance and everything else. There aren't many companies making Zweihanders or Spadone Montante, whatever you want to call them, out there. And there are a few other companies who are making, perfectly nice ones. It just so happens that I have a working relationship, obviously, with Kveten, so I ended up with this. I haven't done a proper review of it again. I know that's on my list. It is absolutely coming. I'm actually a bit drowning in reviews at the moment, so I need to stop taking samples for a bit and focus on getting those reviews done. But this is lovely. It is so beautifully made, and for its size, I mean, it's not a light weapon, but for its size, it is so nimble, and it's kind of a bit weird. It's kind of a bit weird of how far you can reach with this thing without very much effort at all. So beautifully made, and it looks fantastic in the background there, and is a lot better than the other Zweihander I had up there before in terms of quality. And I will be doing more with this year, including hopefully looking at some of the Montante sources, looking at what Zweihanders or Spadone Montante, what they were used for, how they were used, what they can do against other weapons, this kind of stuff. So we will be looking at these in future videos. So one of the reasons it featured in this video is because it's so impressive, such an amazing thing to get from Kavitan, and so useful to my channel as well, and I think so many people want to know more about these things. So there you go, that has been my personal favourite weapon acquisitions of 2021. A few questions for you guys. What did you think about these things? Are any of these that you would like to ask specific questions about or know more about that I haven't already covered, or you'd like me to cover when I do the review or when I do a feature video about the historical antiques? Additionally, are there other types of weapons you'd like me to look at? Are there things that you know that I have, because I've featured them in videos, and you want to know why they weren't on this list, or whether they'll feature in future videos, that kind of stuff. Also, what were your favourite acquisitions of 2021? So, as you know, when I publish a video like this, I do read the comments and I do respond some of the time, even if it's just with a with my kind of symbol. But sometimes I, get involved in conversations with people if I think there's something I can help, or if it's something I find particularly interesting. And so I'm particularly interested in knowing what your favourite acquisitions of 2021 were, and what are you intending to get in 2022? Are there any particular companies I should be looking at? Are there companies that maybe I don't know about at the moment that I should be looking at, testing out their products, having a look at their products? Or are there particular types of antiques that you think I should maybe looking to acquire for my business or for my collection? Very interested to see what you post and come up with underneath. Thanks a lot for watching. I hope you're having a great holiday period, and I'll see you again back on the channel for another video. Cheers, folks.